Hey guys, it's Lionel here with Hobbies and Man once again, and today we are having another episode of the Sword and Sorcery Book Club, and today we're going to be looking at Borak. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the first story that was published of him, that is called let's see here, The Daughter of Erlik Khan. And this is a pretty long story, actually. It's about 50-something pages, at least according to the way that it's set up here. Quite a few of those pages are just art, so it's not that long, but it definitely felt pretty long for me. I think it dragged a little bit. And Borak, his name is actually Francis Javier Gordon, right? And I say Javier instead of Xavier because the way that he's described, he's from Texas, and he's described as someone that fits within the Middle Eastern areas that they're on, right? So that implies that he has some sort of, tan kind of skin, right? And if he's from Texas, specifically in the time period that he's from, he's probably somewhat Hispanic, right? He's probably Mexican in some way. And Xavier is a word that can be pronounced as Javier because in Spanish, especially in Old Spanish, the X can sometimes make a J sound, right? And I think it was Pat Searcher that recently said on Twitter that, if he wrote an Borak story, he would have probably written him so that his mother was some sort of, Spanish descent, or Hispanic descent, probably. I think that really works, right? So in my head, he's, Gordon Javier, Francis Javier Gordon, right? But I actually think Francis Xavier is probably the right way to say it because Francis Xavier is the name of a French saint, I think, who was from Xavier, the place, right? So it is what it is. But yeah, I think of him as like, some sort of Mexican-American kind of guy. I think that works out pretty well, right? So yeah, that's it for the book facts here. It's December 1934. It was published in a pulp, a pulp magazine, but I can't remember the name of it because it was not Weird Fantasy or Weird Tales or any of those. It was a different one, but I just can't remember the name of the magazine at this point. And yeah, so the story is set up as a 10-part story, right? So each part is kind of an act in the story, if you want to call it that. I think the divisions actually happen a bit too often, and I honestly would say that this is probably like a 3.5 out of 5 story for me. I think it's cool, and it actually would be a great basis for a movie. I think this would be awesome as a movie, but as a story, I just didn't feel myself all that engaged by it, right? And there could be a lot of different reasons for that. It could be that I wasn't really in the right mood for reading, although that's not necessarily true because I read a bunch of other stuff instead of this. Or it could mean that I was just not ready for this genre, or any number of things. But ultimately, I felt a bit bored reading this, so that's kind of disappointing. But it is what it is, right? So part one opens up with these two men, Pembroke and Ormond, who are talking about this treasure. Right, they're talking about this thing that's hidden in this area in these mountains. When this guy, Francis Xavier Gordon, shows up, and he's called Borak, the Swift in Arabic, I think. And he approaches, and so the men erase the map that they were drawing in the ground really quickly, and just kind of try to play it off as just messing around, in order to kind of not have to share the treasure that they want to look for with him, right? Gordon eventually goes off hunting. He sees a deer or something in the distance, and he decides to go hunt it so that they can have fresh meat for camp tonight, for the dinner. And as he does this, the men go back to talking. They get inside their tent, and then while they're talking and they're talking about their plans, they hear something outside their tent, right? It turns out that Ahmed, the friend of Gordon that was part of their camp of the group, was eavesdropping on them. So they grab him, they pull him inside the tent, they kill him, and then they run away towards the mountain, right? The mountain is Mount Erlik Khan, which is based on an ancient Middle Eastern deity of some sort, right? So if you read Red Sonja, the current run has Erlik as one of the big bad guys, and he's like this demon-looking guy. And it's pretty cool. I think it's interesting how Robert E. Howard kind of connects all of these different mythologies together, right? And so they run off towards the mountain, and then part 2 starts, and here we see Gordon was hunting. A bullet comes by him, and he immediately, steps up and shoots the shooter. And it turns out that it's a Turkmen bandit, right? And they call them Torkomens here. I think that's an old, way of saying it. I think they're just Turkmen because of the region that they're from. They might be like from Turkmenistan, right? Or what eventually becomes Turkmenistan. And he sees that this guy is a bandit, and he just heads back to camp. He finds it empty. It's a bit disconcerting, a bit concerning for him. He doesn't understand why it's empty, because it shouldn't be. He notices that, it's a bit too clean, but there's some tracks here and there, and he follows him. It turns out that it leads to his friend who's dying, and he manages to get some last-minute information from him before he passes away. He swears vengeance on Pembroke and Ormond, and he goes off to chase them and see if he can find them, right? He does this after he buries his friends so that the wolves don't eat him. And then he finds them at this Kyrgyz camp, and somehow they're not dead, which is surprising because the Kyrgyz, the Black Kyrgyz, are a very savage group that are not very interested in talking with the white man, right? And so he's concerned about this because it's very different from how they usually act, and so he continues to watch them from afar. In part 3, Gordon walks up to the Turkmen camp, which is a camp that's kind of in the same area, but not in the same place as the Kyrgyz camp that he saw Pembroke and Gordon at, and Ormond at. So he walks up to the Turkmen that he knows are there because of the bandit that attacked him earlier. And when he's there, he talks to this guy called Yusuf Khan, and he's the leader of this warband of Turkmens. And he forces a confrontation with him by slighting him, by embarrassing him. And then when they fight, we get to see that Borak is very, very cool and very powerful and very able to, beat this guy in like a single swing of his sword. And this means that Borak is now in charge of this Turkmen warband, right? And so he uses them as a kind of a buffer, but also like a workforce of sorts in order to help him get to the place that he has to get to, which turns out to be this place called Yolgan, which is a mountain state of some sort within this mountain or next to the mountain of Erlik Khan, right? So pretty cool stuff here. I think the world building is good. It's really good at getting you in the setting of helping you understand where you are without telling you, you're in this part of the Middle East. But at the same time, it's kind of unclear, and I would like to know exactly where in the Middle East it happens, but it doesn't really matter all that much. And this part was probably the best part in the book. The fight here with Yusuf Khan is awesome. I think it's really, really well done. It has that really awesome, like lightning, quick speed vibe that he has in all of his fights, right? In all of his Conan stories, he has this sort of like fast, crazy pace, and it manages to be awesome for this, right? Then part 4 leads Gordon to take the Turkmens to Mount Erlik Khan, and he sends this guy Uzun Beg to go back and find the rest of the men so that they can catch up. And it turns out that this guy doesn't trust Borak. He doesn't trust that Borak is going to lead them to riches, and so he decides to just attack the Kyrgyz camp that's nearby. And Borak hears this, and he rushes back down to try to stop them because this is going to make it harder for them to be able to traverse through this area, right? Now, the Kyrgyz men have a reason to chase them down, and there was no winnings. There was no reason to do this. There was no loot at the end of this battle. And so Borak gets really, really mad at all of these Turkmen for following Uzun Beg. He gets mad at Uzun Beg specifically, and he smites him, he kills him, and then he verbally abuses the Turkmens until they listen to him. And I think this is interesting because it's not something that you would usually see in a Conan story, right? He doesn't verbally abuse people into submission. He just kind of like physically uses his power, right? But Borak is a smaller man, right? So he doesn't have that kind of ability, but he's also someone that is very large in spirit, right? So I like that. I think it's really, really cool to have this difference, right? In a more civilized time, he can use his words nearly as effectively as he can use his sword. So I think that's cool. In part 5, we finally make it to Yolgan, and he lets him rest. he sneaks into the city. He captures a Pathan, and this is one of the men that was working for him in the camp with Pembroke and Ormond at the beginning of the story. I don't know where they're from. They speak Pashto, so they have to be like from like Pakistan, right? But I'm not sure, because a lot of mentions of Kashmir and these areas of like West India are mentioned, but I don't know if that's like West North India, I think. But it's not clear where they're at, right? Like they're not in like the Levant, but they're not in India either. It's kind of somewhere in the middle. And it's kind of interesting that they're there, right? And he gets information out of this guy. Then he kills all of the Pathan men that were there, and he enters the Temple of Swords. And he actually ends up finding a woman that he knows, and her name is Yasmina, and she happens to be some sort of special lady. She has this star birthmark on her chest, and so when she made it to the city, they thought that she was the daughter of Erlik Khan, a goddess of sorts, right? And so she is now trapped as a goddess, and it doesn't work for her because she escaped her husband from Kashmir in order to try to gain freedom, and ended up trapped in a different place in a different way, but still like without agency, and she's upset about this. But Gordon helps her out because he's friends with her, and he gives her a pistol, and he's like, take this in case anyone comes by, and then he leaves to go find more information. And then the story splits into part 6 and 7, and they're actually the same storyline, just from different perspectives, right? So part 6 deals with Gordon skulking around Yogan. He finds a guard, and he gets information out of him by engaging him in general conversation, right? It turns out that Yogak, who is the leader of this temple, the head priest or whatever, wants to kill Yasmina because her being considered the daughter of a god has more authority than him, and he doesn't like that. And so she's been messing with the way that he does things, and he doesn't appreciate that. And so he wants to get rid of her. He wants to kill her ultimately, but there's other ways that he can kind of manage to do that. And that's actually why Pembroke and Ormond had this letter that gave them information to get here, because that letter was supposed to be for Borak to get him to save her, and it turns out that it was actually turned into a way to get Pembroke and Ormond to try to take gold from this area, right? And so Gordon accidentally ends up, doing what he had to do, regardless of whether or not, he was led about it the right way. So he finds Yogak, he does find Yogak and the men, Pembroke and Ormond, and he learns that they went to Yasmina's room, and they know that Gordon is here. They know that Borak is here, and so he runs back upstairs to Yasmina's room, but he can no longer find her. She's gone. There's nothing there, and he finds a hidden passage. He tries to go through it, and then he gets thrown down this kind of slide into like a random area of the wilderness, right? Pretty cool stuff. Very, very Indiana Jones-esque, and I like that. I think it's fun, but there's just something that isn't quite working for me in this story. Like, it's just not clicking the way that I think it should. And I think it's because when I think of stories like this, I think more of like movies, right? And the fact that this is a written story kind of makes it harder for me to connect with what's going on. And also, I just think that the character development isn't really all that, well done. Like, I understand who Gordon is and why he's the way he is. He's like a very, Conan-esque character. Like, he has that sort of like vitality about life, and is a hard man that likes wilderness and savagery over civilization. But I don't understand his desire to avenge Ahmed beyond the fact that they're friends. It's not clear that they're super friends, right? It doesn't really necessarily work. And then Yasmina coming in, we don't know her history with Borak at this point. So again, he's just doing these things that he could easily just not do. And so I think that's what's not working for me. His motivation seems very flimsy, right? So it is what it is, I guess. Part 7, like I said, is the other side of the same story. So this time we're focusing on Yasmina. And she's not a very action-oriented person. So even though she finds the gun interesting, she ultimately puts it down. And this kind of ends up being her downfall, because suddenly out of a random tapestry on the wall, a hand reaches out. And this hand is described as yellowing, right? And then the face that comes out, which is supposed to be Yogak, is defined as a gray serpentine face. So, I initially thought that he was like a lizard man, right? Like a serpent man. It turns out that he's not. He's just an ugly looking guy. And he, catches her. He gets the men to bind her, and then they all steal her away. And they use these secret passages across the city to leave, and then go to the Pathan Cave from parts 5. And it turns out that they're not there anymore because they're dead. And then we fade to black to a different scene where we start part 8, where we get to see that Gordon lands on this, messed up place. He finds a sword and he walks out through the tunnels. Eventually ends up in the same spot that Yasmina was in earlier and finds Yogok there. And he's kind of scared out of his mind because he just had a fight with Ormond and Pembroke. He actually hurts Pembroke enough to kill him, but he's he dies very slowly, right? And so Gordon grabs him and he forces him to take him back to where they were. They find Pembroke, he dies, and then they chase after Ormond and Yasmina, who have left Pembroke behind because they didn't want to bother saving him. And, Ormond was ultimately very greedy, and he was like, well, he's already dying. I'm not going to bother trying to make him better. I'm just going to leave, right? And so then Gordon forces Yogok to lead him through the fastest passages possible to get to them as fast as they can. And they chase after Yasmina, right? Part 9 leads them out of the tunnels. They catch up with Ormond, and there's a bit of a shootout. Ormond wastes all of his ammo because he's panicking. And Gordon catches him, but Ormond falls through a crevice, a fissure in the ground. And it seems like that's the end of him. And Gordon even talks about how he's unsatisfied with the way that it ended because he doesn't get to, avenge his friend. These people just died by their own hand, not by his. And so he's kind of upset about this, which is kind of an interesting thing to say. I quite like that. I think it's cool. Not in the sense that it makes him a good person, just in the sense that it's an interesting bit of character, right? Like that he wanted to avenge these guys properly, that it was supposed to be him that did it. And he's upset that it wasn't, right? And then he finds Yasmina, and now they have to save his Turkish men, right? His Turkmen, because they were fighting with the Kyrgyz outside, and he thinks about what he did, right? He led them here. It's only right that he leads them out, right? And so he goes to find his Turkmen, and they escape into the mountains. It's dangerous, but they eventually make it to the gold mine of Erlik Khan, right? There's this part of the mountain that has this giant brass door. They manage to get inside, and it turns out that this is a giant gold mine that's, full of gold to a ridiculous degree. And so the Turkmen are now happy with Borak. He has managed to lead them where they wanted him to lead them, and now they have gold to spare them, right? To last them their whole lives. And so at this point, they try to escape through the other side of the mountain, of this complex inside the mountain. And when they do, one of the men dies because up above in the fissures higher up, there's a man. Turns out that it's Ormond, who did not die. And he's throwing rocks down at them, and so he's causing these men to not be able to walk through this mountain path because it's very treacherous, and the fact that he's throwing rocks at them makes it even worse, right? And so Gordon at this point has not been able to sleep for multiple days in a row, and so he's very tired, but he forces his will to give him strength to his body, and he climbs up the steep rock in order to go fight Ormond. And he actually falls while he's doing this. He ends up kind of locked in by his rifle. He yanks it out of the stone, and he finds a way to climb up, but his rifle fell to the bottom of the ravine or whatever. And so now he has to fight with Ormond, steel to steel, right? And Borak is ultimately a better swordsman, and so he kills Ormond by cleaving his head. And he falls down into the fissure, and then the Turkmen call up to him. They're like, hey, this guy just fell down. Is it safe now? And, it is. And so they all go on their merry way into the next adventure. And ultimately, by the end, I did like this story, but I just don't find it to be all that riveting compared to other, Robert E. Howard stories that I've read before. And so it is kind of a 3.5 out of 5 for me. That's a bit disappointing because I think Borak is a really interesting character, right? The fact that he's this Texan guy that decided that it wasn't savage enough in Texas, and so he decided to move out to the Middle East and really finds himself there. It's a really cool concept, and it's a very interesting idea, right? And of course, he's based on, you know, Alan Quartermain, and, you know, he probably inspired Indiana Jones, and it's that sort of like adventure guy, right? And Lords of Arabia and stuff, right? It's that sort of idea. But for whatever reason, maybe it was the length, or maybe it was the way that he kind of decides to go about telling the story. This just wasn't that interesting to me, and that's pretty disappointing, right? So there you go. Those are my thoughts on Borak. I hope that he ends up being a cool character in the Battle of the Blackstone, but who knows, right? So today's Saturday. When I post this video, I will try to put the next video for the Road to Blackstone up tomorrow, Sunday. If I can't, I'll do it on Monday, and hopefully I'll do the Blackstone video on Tuesday. If I can't, I will do it after I post the review for Savage Sword of Conan. It's gonna be a bit late at that point, but hopefully I'll have read it beforehand, and so it'll still kind of work out, but we'll see how it goes, right? So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed, and you know, see you guys in the next video. So see you guys later.